I paid my brother's tuition and covered his car payments for 2 years. But at dinner he smirked and called me the family failure. I smiled and said, "Funny, that failure just ended your funding." The room went silent when I explained who really paid his bills. I used to think there was something broken in me for resenting my own brother. But the truth is, it wasn't resentment. It was exhaustion. The kind that builds up quietly until one day it turns into something sharper, something dangerous. For 2 years I'd been the one paying his tuition. Not because our parents couldn't, but because Kyle didn't want to burden them. That's what he said anyway. He made it sound noble. What he didn't mention was that I was the one secretly wiring him money each semester, covering his car payments, sending him cash when his bank account was frozen again. I told myself I was helping. That's what family does, right? But after a while it stopped feeling like help and started feeling like a scam. Kyle was always charming, effortlessly so. He could walk into a room and make everyone feel like they were his best friend. My parents ate it up. My mom would beam at him saying things like, "He just needs time to figure things out." My dad called him a free spirit, which was his polite way of saying lazy. Meanwhile I was the reliable one. The one who paid my own way, handled my own messes and still somehow made time to clean up his. I didn't even tell anyone what I was doing for him. I thought if I just stayed quiet he'd grow up eventually. But that illusion shattered the night he humiliated me in front of everyone. It was one of those full family dinners at my parents' house. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, laughter echoing from the dining room. I remember sitting there, already exhausted from work, just trying to make it through one evening without some passive-aggressive comment from mom about finding time for dating. Kyle showed up late as usual, wearing new sneakers and a watch I'd definitely never seen before. He greeted everyone like a celebrity arriving at a fan event, dropping little hints about big plans and exciting projects that didn't actually exist. Halfway through dinner, my aunt asked him how school was going. He started spinning his usual story, how he'd been networking with professors and might get an internship offer soon. I sat there quietly, biting my tongue, knowing he'd missed more classes than he'd attended last semester. Then Aunt Lynn turned to me. She asked how my business was doing and I told her things were fine, just busy. I mentioned I'd been so swamped with client work that I barely had time to cook lately. Kyle laughed, loudly, obnoxiously, and said, "Yeah, we can tell." The table went quiet. He leaned back, smirking, and added, "I mean, come on, Ev. You've always been the family failure. But hey, at least you're well fed." Something inside me clicked. For 2 years I'd paid for everything that kept him standing. His education, his car, his apartment, his damn streaming subscriptions. And he still had the audacity to mock me in front of everyone, to call me a failure while he lived off my paychecks. I could feel my parents waiting for me to laugh it off, to keep the peace like I always did. But I didn't. I smiled, not because it was funny but because I suddenly realized how much power I actually had. I put my fork down and said, "You know what, Kyle? You're right. I am the failure. Funny thing though, that failure just ended your funding." He froze. So did everyone else. My dad's fork clinked against his plate. My mom blinked, confused. Kyle looked like he was trying to figure out what I meant. So I explained. I don't think Kyle expected me to speak. That was his mistake. He was used to me swallowing everything. Every insult, every jab, every time he forgot to pay me back. He counted on my silence because it made him look like the better sibling. But that night he pushed too far. And he pushed me into a place where I didn't care about keeping the peace anymore. So I told them. I said the car he bragged about, still technically mine. He couldn't get approved for financing with his non-existent credit, so I signed the loan. He was supposed to send me the payments every month. I only ever got them twice. Once when our parents gave him money for Christmas, and once when he guilt-tripped an ex-girlfriend into covering him. I said the tuition he pretended to be struggling through was actually funded by my freelance contracts. He hadn't qualified for financial aid anymore. Too many failed classes. And guess who stepped in so he wouldn't fall behind? Me. I said the apartment he posted on Instagram like he was living some polished, independent dream? I'd paid the deposit. I covered 2 months of rent when he blew his budget on a gaming console and a weekend trip to Vegas. That one really landed. My cousin Jason actually choked on his drink. I told them everything. Fully. Purry. No raised voice. No drama. Just facts. And as I spoke, the mood in the room shifted. I watched the expression on my mom's face change from confusion to disbelief to something quieter. Something that looked a lot like shame. My dad didn't say a word. He just stared at his plate like it was suddenly more complicated than he could deal with. Kyle kept trying to interrupt, but I didn't give him the space. He started saying things like, "That's not fair," and "You offered," and "You don't understand what I've been dealing with." But I didn't stop. He kept going. I brought up the time he lied and said his financial aid check hadn't come through, so I paid his rent. Only for him to post pictures from a music festival that same weekend. I told them about the credit card I opened for him, for emergencies, that he maxed out on food delivery and gas station energy drinks, and then ghosted me for 3 weeks when I asked him to help with the payments. I said flat out that he'd never once said thank you. Then I looked directly at him and said, "You think I'm the failure? You've done nothing for 2 years except lie, mooch, and pretend. And the only reason you've gotten away with it is because everyone in this room was too busy coddling you to see it." No one said a word. It was the kind of silence that doesn't feel real. The kind that presses on your chest and makes your skin go hot. No clinking forks. No nervous laughter. Just stillness. And then the worst part happened. Not yelling, not fighting, just realization. One by one, people started looking at Kyle differently. Not like the golden boy. Not like the charming younger brother. But like someone they suddenly didn't recognize. He sat there, hunched over, staring at the table like if he didn't make eye contact, the moment wouldn't be real. But it was. It was finally real. It was my dad who stood up first. No words. No outburst. He just pushed back from the table and walked out of the room like he needed to be somewhere else, anywhere else. Honestly, I think it was the only way he could hold himself together. For a man who'd spent most of his life pretending problems would go away if he just stayed calm enough, this wasn't something he could smooth over. My mom was next. She turned to Kyle, slow and stiff like she was afraid of the answer, and asked him if it was all true. The tuition. The rent. Everything I just laid out. Kyle didn't even deny it. He shrugged and said, "It's not like she couldn't afford it." That sentence hit the table harder than anything I'd said. I laughed. Quietly. Not because it was funny, but because I realized something right then. Kyle hadn't just been using me. He actually believed he deserved it. He saw nothing wrong with what he'd done. He thought my success gave him a license to coast. I looked at my mom. I lived on protein bars for 3 weeks because my client payments got delayed. I overdrew my account twice. Meanwhile, he was in Miami with his friends, using money I sent him for books. My cousin Olivia blinked, looked down at her plate, then spoke up. Said Kyle had borrowed $1,000 from her back in July. Told her he'd get dropped from his classes if he didn't pay some late registration fee. Promised he'd pay her back in a month. She never saw a dime. Everyone turned to look at him. Kyle suddenly wasn't saying much. Then my uncle spoke up, the quiet one who never got involved. He said Kyle had come to him last year too. Told him he didn't want to bother the family, and just needed help with a security deposit for a better place, somewhere safer, quieter so he could focus on school. He gave him $1,500. My mom looked like she'd been slapped. She asked Kyle about the money she gave him this past April. $3,000. He told her it was for tuition, last chance to keep his enrollment. But he didn't enroll in anything. He asked where it went. He didn't answer. That was the moment everything snapped into place for her, I think. Not just what he had done, but how easily he'd lied to everyone in this family. How many times he'd cried broke while spending money that wasn't his. How comfortable he was making everyone else pay for his life while acting like he was doing us a favor by existing. He started saying he was stressed, that we didn't get it, that he was in a bad place mentally, that he meant to pay everyone back. The usual. But nobody was listening anymore. When my dad came back into the room, he didn't sit down. He stayed standing, arms crossed, and said, "That apartment? You pay for it yourself now. Same with the car. If you want help, you get a job. And if you lie again to anyone in this family, that's it. You're on your own." Kyle didn't even look surprised. Just exposed. For the first time in years, he had no script. I didn't say another word. I didn't need to. Because the moment had done the work for me. The story was out. His act was over. And everyone was finally seeing him without the shine, without the charm, without the excuses. I looked around the table, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt the weight shift. People weren't looking at me like the struggling older sister anymore. They were seeing something else. Something closer to the truth. The silence afterward wasn't relief. It was that eerie kind of silence that comes after a storm, when the house is still standing, but you're not sure if the roof's about to cave in. I didn't hear from Kyle for days. Not a text, not a call, not even a half-baked excuse or one of his usual guilt trips wrapped in just checking in. I figured he was sulking, licking his wounds, waiting for everyone to forget. That had always been his method. Disappear, lay low, then pop back up with some new version of himself and hope nobody remembered the mess he left behind. But something shifted this time. 3 days after the dinner, my mom called and asked if I had proof. Not in a suspicious way, not like she didn't believe me, but calm, almost businesslike. She wanted bank statements, Venmo screenshots, emails. She and my dad were going over everything with Kyle that weekend. I was quiet for a second. Then I asked, "Why now? She said they'd been talking. A lot. My dad had gone through Kyle's academic record. He wasn't even enrolled for the current semester. Hadn't been since the spring. He'd lied about that too. Lied straight to their faces for months. That weekend Kyle was going to sit down with them and go through every lie line by line. My mom said they needed everything to be in front of him. Printed, highlighted, no more room to twist the story. My dad had made a spreadsheet. I actually laughed when I heard that. The same man who once told me don't rock the boat when Kyle totaled my bike and blamed the neighbor's kid, was now treating his son like a financial audit case. And he was serious. No more rescuing. No more coddling. I sent them everything. Dozens of screenshots, loan details, emails he'd sent me when he was panicking about rent. I even included the message from when he asked me to lie to our parents once. Told me to say he was handling things, when he was actually $600 behind on utilities. Then came the unexpected part. My cousin Olivia messaged me a few days later. She'd gotten a long apology from Kyle. Actual paragraphs. Not the usual vague, manipulative nonsense he used to send. No gaslighting, no guilt-tripping, no playing victim. Just ownership. He said he was embarrassed. That he knew he'd hurt people. That he was applying for work and didn't expect forgiveness overnight, but wanted to start doing better. I didn't trust it completely. I'd been here before. The regret, the empty promises, the slight shift in behavior that never lasted. But Olivia said it felt different. Maybe it was. Because that same day my uncle called me. The one Kyle had borrowed over $1,000 from. He said he'd been thinking about it ever since that dinner, and the thing that struck him the most wasn't Kyle's behavior. It was how long I'd carried the burden alone. He apologized. Said he should have said something. That he saw things and stayed quiet. We all had. And it had let Kyle believe he could keep doing it. I didn't cry on the phone. But after I hung up I just sat on the floor and stared at the wall. That night I got an invitation to dinner from my mom. Just me. No Kyle. When I showed up she had already made coffee and pulled out an old tin of cookies I used to love as a kid. It was weirdly quiet. We sat down at the kitchen table and she looked at me and said, "I was so worried about your brother drowning. I didn't notice you were the one holding him above the water." She told me they weren't paying a cent more toward his rent. That if he wanted to keep the car he'd have to refinance it in his name. They'd even offered to help, but only if he got a job, showed the pay stubs and stuck to a plan. No more next semester. No more pretending. I didn't know how to respond. For the first time in years they were actually parenting him. The next day I got an alert from my credit card company. A payment had been made. $200. From Kyle. It barely scratched the surface of what he owed. But it was something. Then 2 days later he texted me. Just a few words. "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I'm going to pay back every cent. Even if it takes me years." I stared at the screen for a long time. And just when I thought the dust had truly settled, it didn't. Because the next week, a charge appeared on my card from a clothing store I'd never been to. A $320 charge. My name. My card. His style. I hadn't closed the emergency card I gave him a year ago. Thought I had. I was wrong. I stared at the charge for a full minute before my brain caught up with what I was looking at. $320. Some trendy streetwear store in downtown LA. The kind of place that sells graphic tees for $70 and sneakers with names instead of prices. The card he'd used wasn't even supposed to exist anymore. It was the emergency one I opened for him a year ago, back when he convinced me he just needed something to keep gas in the tank until graduation. I'd thought I'd closed the account after the last time he maxed it out. But apparently I hadn't followed through. I wanted to believe it was a mistake. Maybe he forgot the card was still active. Maybe the store had it saved in their system somehow. Maybe this wasn't what it looked like. But then I checked the time of the transaction. 3:42 p.m. And at 3:55 p.m., just 13 minutes later, he posted an Instagram story. A selfie in a dressing room mirror, wearing a black hoodie with a gold logo and the caption, "Little treat for myself. Been grinding." Grinding. He said grinding. I didn't even feel angry at first. Just tired. Bone deep tired. I'd given him every benefit of the doubt, watched him slowly start to climb out of the pit he dug for himself, even let myself believe he might finally be changing. And here he was 13 minutes after swiping a card that didn't belong to him, bragging about treating himself. I screenshotted the charge. Then the Instagram story. Then I called him. He didn't answer. Of course not. So I sent both screenshots with one sentence. "I gave you every chance. This is it." Still no reply. I waited. An hour. Nothing. Finally, around 11 p.m. he texted back. "I forgot the card was still active. So, I'll send it back." No apology. No explanation. Just a brush off like I was making a big deal out of nothing. Like $320 stolen from someone who'd already given him thousands didn't count. That was it for me. Not the charge. Not the lie. Though. I called the card company, filed a fraud report, and closed the account for good this time. Then I did something I should have done a long time ago. I blocked him. On everything. Text, email, Venmo, Instagram. I even removed him as an emergency contact from my doctor's office. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done. The next morning my parents called. Kyle had told them I was overreacting again. Said he was figuring things out and that I cut him off over nothing. But this time they didn't defend him. My mom asked what happened. I sent her the screenshots. 10 minutes later she replied, "We understand. Do what you need to do." I expected guilt. I expected second thoughts. But they never came. For the first time in years, I slept without checking my phone in the middle of the night to see if Kyle had texted needing money. I woke up to silence. Real silence, not the kind that comes with tension but the kind that feels like space to breathe. And for the first time that weight I'd been carrying, it wasn't on my shoulders anymore. I used to think Kyle would always be part of my life whether I liked it or not. That no matter how badly he behaved, no matter how many times he drained my patience or my bank account, I'd somehow always find a way to justify keeping him close. He was my brother. That's what you do, right? But it turns out some relationships don't need to be fixed. They need to be ended. After I blocked him and shut off every possible financial channel between us, the silence was almost disorienting. I didn't realize how much of my daily life had revolved around anticipating his next need, his next mess. I kept checking my phone out of habit, expecting a new text, some vague emotional bait, some half-joke about being broke again. But there was nothing. And in that nothing I started to breathe again. It was weird at first. I felt guilt, even in the quiet. I'd spent so long reacting to him, planning around him, making sure he didn't fall apart. I didn't know how to just live my life without that constant low-grade anxiety humming in the background. But slowly, the space he left behind started to feel like something else. Freedom. I bought a new desk. Took a weekend trip to Seattle. I started saying yes to things I used to decline out of financial caution. Dinner invites, last-minute road trips, even little things like grabbing coffee without overthinking the cost. I finally replaced my old laptop, which had been dying for months. Every click of the new keyboard felt like a reminder. This is yours now. Around that time my mom called and asked if I could come over for dinner. Just dinner. No agenda, no big talk. She made pasta, poured wine, and we sat in the backyard under the string lights they'd never bothered to use before. He told me Kyle was home. Had been for a few weeks. She didn't ask me to reach out. She didn't excuse anything he'd done. She just told me the facts. He was working part-time at a hardware store, taking the bus, doing chores around the house, and slowly paying back what he owed. Apparently, my dad gave him a printed budget and told him if he missed 1 week, they'd pull every bit of support. She said Kyle didn't argue. He was quieter now. Tired. Different. He didn't ask for things anymore. He didn't talk about big plans. Mostly he just worked, ate, and slept. And for the first time in his life, he seemed to understand that people weren't going to carry him forever. I nodded. I didn't ask to see him. I didn't need to. The next week he sent me one last message. I saw it through my email. An old account I hadn't deleted yet was still linked to one of his contacts. I get why you're done. I'd be done too. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. And I'm paying everyone back. Even you. I know I said that before. But I actually mean it now. Hope you're good. I didn't respond. Not out of anger. Not out of pride. I just didn't need anything from him anymore. Not his money, not his apology, not his promise to change. I'd built a life without him in it, and it was better. The rest of the family slowly started seeing it too. I think they had expected me to forgive him eventually, to fold like I always did. But I didn't. And that, more than anything, seemed to change how they saw me. My cousin Olivia started inviting me to things again. Not out of pity but as a peer. My uncle pulled me aside at a barbecue and said he wished he'd spoken up sooner. Even my mom stopped looking at me like the fixer. He just started looking at me. Really seeing me. And for the first time in years I felt respected. Not because I'd sacrificed, but because I'd stopped. Kyle's still figuring himself out. He'll probably struggle for a while. Maybe a long while. But that's his to manage now. He's no longer my burden. I'm not the backup parent. I'm not the quiet financier. I'm not the safety net. I'm just Evelyn. And I'm finally free.